Hey, everybody.
Good afternoon, Jason.
Hello.
Hi.
Rick, once your meeting gets going, I'll probably turn off my video, but if you need me, just let me know.
Okay.
And Joan, that could be the best backlighting problem I've ever seen. Oh, there you go.
Rick, can you introduce everybody while we're waiting? Is there a Rick here? Yes.
Yes, I am here. I did want to say that essentially what we're planning is to let everybody do individual introductions first so we can get to know one another. Then after that, we've got one piece of administrative business we need to do, which is approve the draft minutes from our last meeting. And then I thought I would give a short rundown of current parking topics facing the city, most of which is not going to be news to the older members of the panel. I don't think we'll have enough time to go into very in-depth discussions of each of them, but at least particularly for the new members, they can get to know what issues we see are in front of us, and then I can send additional backup material and we can exchange emails about some of the topics before our next meeting. If that sounds okay to everyone, this is not my panel. I'm not in charge. I'm simply your ex officio staff person from the city.
Are we expecting Andrew to join us?
Andrew chose not to reapply, and in fact, he has moved to Houston and has a new job there.
Wow.
I got an
It has been a while since we met.
yesterday.
Yeah.
So we have no chair.
We currently, that means we have no chair.
Shall we make a temporary chair for 1 or 2 meetings of somebody that's been on the committee and then have elections after that? Would that make sense?
Was that a volunteer?
Derby.
I don't think so, but well, I was looking at Mike or Kirby, who are repeat offenders. Do either of you want to do it? If not, I will volunteer, but I'd much rather somebody else do it.
I'll take the temporary job. So I guess the first step is call the meeting to order.
Excellent work.
And first order of business is reviewing the minutes from, is that February?
That is correct. And I did send those out to everyone. So hopefully you have a copy and can vote accordingly.
I move to accept the minutes and approve them as written.
Second.
Everyone in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any
Aye.
opposed? All right, now I'm going to kick it over to Rick, our trustee advisor, and he can go into the meat of the meeting.
Well, let's start with some introductions. Jake, if you don't mind starting off as one of our new panelists. First, I will say that I'm very happy to have new folks join us. This panel's been in effect for about 1.5 years, and we have never had the full complement of volunteers. So even though everybody hasn't made the meeting today, I do thank the new people for joining us. Go ahead, Jake.
All right, yeah, and thanks, Rick, for for the welcome, and I'm sure I'll be asking you questions as we go along, so thanks in advance for that. Yeah, my name's Jake Mooney. I've lived in Charlottesville this time for about 7 years now. Before that, I was in New York for 10 years. Before that, I lived in Charlottesville and was a reporter for the Daily Progress many years ago. And I've met at least one of you during those days, Joan. Yeah, I work downtown. I mean, I haven't been to my office since March, but I, in normal times, work downtown. In normal times, was going there every day. I go down there a lot for recreation, also, of course. Care about the neighborhood, and yeah, it's going to be interesting and fun to be a part of this. So thank you.
Do we have any more volunteers?
I'll speak. My name's Jamel Bowie. I've been living here in Charlottesville since 2017. I went to UVA from 2005 to 2009. So I suppose I was technically living here then. That doesn't really count, I don't think. My wife's family is from the area, and so more or less from 2010 until I moved here in 2017, I was in Charlottesville on a pretty regular basis. And prior to living here, I was in DC for 7 years. I live in the Ridge Street neighborhood, just right by Mount Zion African Baptist, and I am primarily a bike commuter and a pedestrian. So I'm sort of looking forward to discussing these issues from the perspective of someone who owns a car, but whose primary mode of transportation is not by car.
Thank you.
I guess that leaves me. My name is Danny Yoder. I've lived in Charlottesville for 1 year, but most recently I was in New York for about 6 years, but then my wife's family is from Central Virginia, and I lived here before New York for about 10 years in the area, so I'm pretty familiar with the area. I am a transportation planner for a planning and engineering firm, EPRPC, that is based in downtown Charlottesville. So my office is downtown, although I haven't been there since March. And I, have a car and I drive, but I typically walk downtown to work when I actually used to commute. Yeah, so that's me.
Thank you.
I'll go if you want.
Joan, you ready to go?
Sure. I'm Joan Fenton. I've been in Charlottesville since '91. I'm originally from New York. I'm chair of the Downtown Business Association. I have 2 retail stores downtown. I'm a property owner. I own my own parking lot, so I have no problem with parking, but I sympathize with all the other parking issues. And I think parking is a major concern for many of us downtown and really needs to be something that is thought out and not haphazard. So I appreciate being on this committee. That's enough.
Kirby?
Sure. Kirby Hutto, currently the general manager of the Sprint Pavilion. I've been involved in downtown since '92 when I came on board to run special events for the then Charlottesville Downtown Foundation. Actually, my first formal event was the groundbreaking for the Water Street Garage, which was the last parking structure that has been built downtown. as the venue manager for the pavilion, I'm concerned about having inventory when we have 4,000 patrons coming in. So I've had concerns over the last few years about the sort of chipping away of losing 50 spaces to the Belmont Bridge project and losing spaces here. And, you start to see how that accumulates, and, we don't have new inventory coming on board. So that's why I'm particularly excited about the proposed garage for 7th and Market. And, also just making sure that the nighttime business is always got a voice at the table, because retail is certainly a driver, but arts, entertainment, those things also bring huge numbers downtown in the evenings. And we have to have parking, because a lot of those visitors are tourists or county residents, and they are not necessarily going to opt for public transportation when they're coming downtown for a few hours for dinner and a show.
And we have missed your events and look forward to when that's going to start again.
As do I, yes.
Michael or Mike?
What's up?
Either one. I am Michael Rohde. I am a resident of close to downtown Charlottesville, and I have a business downtown, a restaurant. I don't know, it's like the common theme. I'm originally from New York, so I came here in 1992 to the region, but lived outside of the city until 2003. My dog's been quiet this whole time, and as soon as I got to bark. Moved into city limits and have lived in town ever since. Like Kirby, dogs. Like Kirby, nightlife is part of my concern with better management of existing inventory and creating new inventory. Though I love to walk and commute and bike and all of that, I realize that in terms of, we're still a community that relies heavily on cars, and simply, getting rid of all the parking hasn't done anything to change that. It's just changed people's traffic patterns away from downtown. Take over.
And Michael, I think you're last.
I'm Michael. I am originally from New York also, actually. I moved to Virginia in 95 in Charlottesville from the River Valley, 8 years ago or something. And actually Albemarle County. And now I moved in the city about a year ago. So I've here almost a year and a month now. And I used to Uber until recently, or March, which is kind of recently. And I live in Johnson Village. I usually only come downtown for entertainment and food, typically. And I miss that a lot. So here I am, trying to do my part for the city.
Thank you, Michael. Jason?
Hey everybody. My name is Jason Ness. I'm Rick's coworker. I work obviously in the Office of Economic Development as the Business Development Manager. My primary role, although it seems to be changing, has been kind of the outward facing, working with the business community. Spend a lot of time working with the downtown businesses. There's a lot of challenges and things going on to operate a business in the city, especially downtown, and just kind of serve as Rick's helper on this committee to inform and the business community of what's going on, and then also be able to give my opinions when needed.
The liaison with the business community is pretty important. Obviously, parking makes a lot of difference to the businesses in the downtown area and throughout Charlottesville. I've been in the parking business about 25 years. I went to high school in New York. My last position before joining the city was the chief of the Division of Parking Management for Montgomery County, Maryland. And I worked in that division for 15 years before I actually retired and then unretired and became the first parking manager for the city of Charlottesville. It was a position that was recommended to be created by the 2015 Nelson Nygaard parking study. The city chose to act on it, created the position, and I took the position about 4 years ago now. It has been interesting. We tried to introduce paid parking on street. That got caught up in a lot of the political furor associated with the Right to Life, Unite the Right organizations and the riots that ensued. And unfortunately, we took that program offline. Originally, when council voted, they suggested that they would be willing to hear about it again in a year, and that was 2 years ago now. Since then, we've made a lot of changes about the parking garages downtown. We negotiated the removal of Charlottesville Parking Center. We got a nationally known commercial parking management company to come in to, in fact, operate the garages for the city based on the policies of the city. So when I've introduced myself to community meetings when I first got here, I said, parking is my fault. And I stand by that. So I'm the forward face for the city on the public parking program. If there aren't any particular questions, we'll move on to the current issues that were sort of facing the panel before we took a hiatus for COVID. Any specific questions or before I do that? Okay.
Rick, did you see Brian's chat? I know that with Kirby stepping up, we usually have a public comment period. Rick indicated that there's some hands up. I didn't know if we wanted to do public comment at the beginning or the end of the meeting.
Yeah, I didn't know if public comment is required. That wasn't something that we were doing before COVID.
I think we had implemented.
Do you have an opinion there?
I think Kirby's right. We did have public comment.
We just never had any, but we offered it. So I guess we should
We had
probably
a
do that.
couple times when we had it, and the questions whether it's at the beginning or the end, I think would really be the.
I remember the guy at the dogs talking.
I think I would recommend to the panel that we did it afterwards, only because I'm afraid that any questions people would have would mean that we would just cover things twice. We might as well at least do an intro, and then that may tee it up for anybody who has a comment on the issues.
Yeah, I think it makes sense to have it after. That way we might address some of the questions and they're going to need to have.
I would suggest if we're doing this online that we also suggest if somebody from the public has a comment, if they want to put it in the chat, so that while we're having the discussion, it might be addressed, and otherwise they have a chance to comment later on too, so that there's that possibility as well.
Not a bad idea, but sorry to interrupt. Just to let you know, the chat and the Q&A module are both disabled on our webinars. So only the panelists can chat, and those are public records.
Okay. I would vote to do it at the end.
Same.
Any other thoughts on that? Somebody want to make a motion then?
Move to do it at the end.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, folks, just hang on. We'll try to cover your questions in the presentations, and we'll take them, any that aren't addressed at the end of the meeting. Rick, let's power on in.
I had three things that I wanted to go into. Since we haven't had a meeting since COVID, I wanted to give you some idea of the things the city had done with regard to parking because of COVID itself. One of them is that we do have free parking on the weekends from Friday at 10 p.m. until Monday morning at both garages. And that's a direct response to COVID to help support the downtown mall businesses. Another thing we've done is, you'll notice there are a large number of temporary foam core signs around the downtown area for 15-minute pickup for parking. The objective is to support restaurants who are doing a lot of takeout. We have taken 9 of those spaces. 5 of them are on the mall, 3 of them are on West Main, and 1's down at the corner in front of Bodo's, and made those more permanent. They have standard regulatory signs now for 15-minute parking, and there is a special green logo painted on the pavement to hopefully alert the public about these as short-term, effectively loading zones around town. In addition, we've had a lot of monthly parkers at both garages. They used to make up about 80% of the parkers. They made up about 90% of the parkers in Water Street and about 80% of the parkers in Market Street. Because of COVID, a lot of people are teleworking. So we tried to acknowledge that by allowing people to suspend their monthly parking. We didn't bill you if you said that you wanted to suspend your parking, but we allowed you to retain your monthly parking pass, your credential. We simply turned it off so it no longer worked. So for instance, if you did work 1 day or 2 days a week, it would be a lot less expensive for you to park in the garage and pay the daily fee than to have been somehow forced to either give up your credential or pay the monthly fee. So that was the objective there. We've been doing that since March. We're ending that program effectively November 1, because we really needed to find out how many people were going to continue to telework versus how many people were going to start parking again. Because we've had a waiting list for the 4 years I've been here. We've had a waiting list of over 100 people for monthly parking in the garages. A number of people had come to us in the last couple of months and said, the garages are half empty. Can I get one of those monthly passes now? Well, since we didn't take any of those monthly passes back from the people who suspended their parking, we weren't comfortable in saying that we'd issue new monthly passes. So that's why we really need a count of what people's future plans are so that we can open up that waiting list, get people off it, and allow people to have monthly parking. There's also been a couple of other changes to monthly parking. Willow Tree has moved out of downtown. That freed up a bunch of spaces in the Water Street garage. In addition, World Strides declared bankruptcy, reorganized, and they've come back to us, and they're keeping more than half of the parking permits that they had prior to COVID, but they are giving up the other half. So that's a fair number of monthlies that have opened up as well. So between those two, I hope by the 1st of December to be able to basically allow anybody who wants to have monthly parking to go ahead and do so. And we can get rid of this waiting list that we've had for 4 years. So that's basically what we have been doing for COVID in the meantime. The next item I had was parking enforcement. We have a lot of 2-hour spaces, loading zone spaces, and ADA accessible handicap marked spaces in the downtown area, particularly on the cross streets around the mall. We did that so that people didn't come into the spaces in the early morning, park all day long and keep other people, for instance, from coming in for the lunch business and not having a place to park. So the objective was to create turnover so that if this one parking space is only used for 2 hours at a time, we may be able to get 4 different people the opportunity to park there rather than one person parking all day. Well, the issue with time restrictions like that is if there's no parking enforcement, people kind of figure it out and ignore the signs. We have had some issues of people believing that the city police that are responsible for the enforcement of those spaces has not been very diligent in doing so. That was before COVID. And I believe the panel had in fact supported the idea of the Office of Economic Development, my department, putting out an RFP for contract enforcement officers. They're pretty common in most cities. Very few larger cities have the police writing parking tickets. They normally have contractors doing so. So the objective was that we'd put out an RFP, we'd hire a company, they would be managed through my office, and we'd have direct control over how many officers were out, how diligently they patrolled and wrote tickets, and the panel and the community would have some direct input to that. That was originally planned 2 city managers ago, and he was in favor of it. However, when it was brought before the chief of police, she was not at all supportive. And so it kind of stopped. One of the things that the panel agreed was that they were going to write a letter in support of contract enforcement, supplementing what the police do. And I believe Kirby was drafting that letter. And that kind of stopped when we stopped having meetings.
Rick, I think I was drafting the letter in support of the 7th Street garage. I think maybe Andrew was doing the parking enforcement letter.
That may be it.
Yeah.
In any case, it never got transmitted to council. So at least as your ex officio advisor, I still recommend that that's a good approach. And I think the panel ought to decide whether that's still a good approach. And if it is, I think a letter informing council of your support is not a bad idea.
Hey, Rick, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Not at all.
Can you give us a sense of what the police chief's objection was?
The police were concerned that if there was not a sworn officer writing these parking tickets, that the public might not respect a contract parking enforcement officer, and that there could be assaults on the street. What are you doing putting us on my car? Get out of here, etc. Also, I believe that the police chief was concerned that effectively the police were still going to be blamed for the tickets. So we were going to have a third party that they had no control over writing tickets while the police took all the bad publicity, since no one ever likes getting a parking ticket. Number 3, I think, I don't want to put words in the chief's mouth, but no person operating a bureaucracy generally wants part of the duties of that bureaucracy to be taken away. I mean, that's just an institutional thing associated with every government in the world. And I don't think that's an unreasonable position if you're the head of the department, that someone's suggesting we're going to take away some of the things you do. I think those were Jason, do you have any anything that you might remember?
I would
Think-
add that in our discussions, we were all in favor of doing this for several reasons. One is that the parking is never enforced. Two, that it was uncomfortable. Some of even the CSOs were rude in issuing parking tickets, that if somebody is going to do this and be paid for hire, that we could train them also to be ambassadors, where part of their job is promoting the parking. The first ticket could be a warning. You could say, hey, this is where you can park. This is what you do. That doesn't happen. This all happened before we have the whole momentum after George Floyd was killed of trying to decrease what the police are responsible for. And going forward, I would say that this is something the police do not need to be doing, and it's much better to not have somebody who you see as an authority figure ticketing you. And it ties in with one way that the police, I would think, should have less enforcement responsibility. There's no reason a police officer has to do that. And I would agree with Rick that the police chief just didn't want to give up the responsibility. But what we've seen is that the CSOs do the ticketing, and if they have something else to do, they're not ticketing. And everybody knows if you don't get ticketed on Monday, Tuesday, you know for the next 3 weeks you're not going to get ticketed. You're willing to take your chance, and then eventually when the tickets start, you start moving your car. So
Yeah, I think the argument is even stronger now that this is a responsibility that should be taken off the police and given to a different entity. So I still remain firmly in support of us putting the RFP out.
And to the new panelists, one of the discussions we had was uniform, right? That the presentation that people could look like they were, designated to do this job, but that they didn't have uniforms that looked like they were part of law enforcement, so that there wouldn't be that confusion, both to benefit the police in terms of being, unclear. What is this person doing? Is this person law enforcement? But also in terms of maybe having a less threatening or less, not to escalate a situation when you're giving someone a ticket and they're angry, that, you just see this person as someone doing their job, wearing bright, colorful clothes or whatever in an unthreatening way.
Take it they wouldn't be armed.
No, absolutely not. And in the city, to be clear, when I was in Montgomery County, Maryland, that's exactly how we handled ticketing. We actually had a force of 24 people. But it was a much larger area that they were patrolling. But, it all goes into the training, and it starts with the uniforms. It's that they don't look like they're wearing a military type uniform. They look like ambassadors. They're trained to de-escalate situations because they are going to occur. When people get a parking ticket, they're generally not happy. And they will certainly react to the person who wrote it. But the entire thrust of the training is to always de-escalate and walk away, because nobody's getting arrested and we simply don't want a confrontation. And if you feel the ticket is unfair, here are the administrative appeals that you have available. Please afford yourself of them. Here's who my supervisor is.
we also
That
talked
sort of
about,
thing. Go ahead, Jim.
well, we also talked about that no tickets would be given for at least the first 15 minutes of when you were over parked. So if it's a 2-hour parking spot, this is a company that's being paid, so we don't want them to have an incentive to come out and ticket you the minute it happens. So if it's 2 hours when they're patrolling, it should be at least 2 hours and 15 minutes later, so that
Well,
leeway.
that's one of the first things usually that the public assumes, is that the officers have some kind of incentive to write the tickets. So you need to be very careful if in your contract that the city is only paid for hours of patrol, period. Doesn't matter if 1 ticket gets written or 100 tickets get written. They're simply paid a flat fee to hire recruit, train, supervise the officers, and they're paid based on the actual hours of patrol of those officers. And that's kind of one of the issues we have with the CSOs, in that the police may suggest that they have CSOs who are out writing tickets, but we can see that they're doing all sorts of other things as well. These contract parking enforcement officers are only paid based on hours of patrol, period.
Rick, didn't you come up with some handouts of sort of best practices around that you all had from Montgomery County and other localities that we could get to the new members to bring them up to speed?
I included one of them in some introductory material that I sent the new members, but I can include more. Also, I can recirculate the RFP. I have the RFP completely drafted. It's essentially ready to advertise, and I can circulate that. And you'll see it's very specific in outlining what the responsibilities are, what authority they have, what authority the city has over the officers in terms of how they patrol, when they issue tickets, which can be altered based on the circumstances.
I think it might be wise to allow the new members to get up to speed, and then we can revisit this at the next meeting. And if the consensus at that point is to put a letter to council, then we can get that process rolling. But I do think that we need to get this back on a front burner. It's been sitting out there with no action for an awful long time.
Well, I'll send everyone the RFP and some of those original supplemental materials from the industry, just talking about pros and cons of contract parking enforcement.
I think that'd be great. Any other comments from other people?
I do have one question, and that is, would these third-party enforcement officers be enforcing off-street and on-street parking downtown, or simply the off-street parking facilities?
The RFP is written based on street, but I'm not sure what off-street parking rules you would want them to be enforcing. Mm-hmm. For the city, we can certainly, for the city, we have one surface parking lot on West 2nd Street with 100 spaces where you pay an automated pay station. And the expectation would be those officers would patrol that parking lot for payment, as well as on street for overtime parking. They would write tickets for double parking. They would write tickets for blocking driveways, parking by a fire hydrant too close to the intersection. Essentially, all of the, there's a section of city code for parking violations. They would write no moving violations, mm-hmm. and they would not go on private property and write tickets. The only ticket, by the way, that you would write on private property would be ADA violations. Mm-hmm. But the expectation is they would not go on private property. The other thought was we have a residential permit program, and the officers would not be patrolling the residential areas for those permits. But at least my personal thought was, once we had that contract in place and the community saw what a good job these folks were doing, we might expand that to also take care of the residential areas, which I know are always an issue. Neighbors fight over parking.
Mm-hmm. So the idea is that they would be doing enforcement downtown, or they would have the ability to do enforcement anywhere in the city?
They would have the authority to do it anywhere in the city. Their contract would only call for the downtown area initially, we could always expand that contract. And if you'll see the way the RFP is written, it provides for the ability to expand the contract at a preset cost to the city.
Okay, thanks.
Kirby, you want me to move on to my last topic?
Yeah, I think so. We'll come back and revisit this after all the new members have a chance to get on board and come up with questions or opinions, and then we can see where we want to go next time. So let's move on.
And anybody on any of these topics who has any questions, please, you can just email me directly and I can email you individually and provide any materials that I might have available. The 7th Street Garage is my last topic. I'm sure everybody would like to know kind of the status of that. As a bit of background, the city and the county, well, the city purchased the parcel of property on East Market Street between 8th and 9th Streets with the Lucky 7 and the Guadalajara on it just a few days before I was hired. I attended that press conference, and it was at least announced to the public that the reason the city was purchasing the property was to build more parking for downtown. The city and the county entered into a memorandum of agreement, and it was primarily based on a desire by both the city and the county to retain the courts downtown in the historic area where they had been. One of the requirements for the county to allow that to happen was for the city to provide 90 more new parking spaces for the exclusive use of the county for its employees, and it does mention specifically people attending court. To help implement that, the county agreed to sell the city their half of what is now a surface parking lot on East Market Street between 7th and 8th Street at the foot of the S&P building. That's currently monthly parking. About half the people on there are S&P employees. The other half are city employees with a couple of other individuals. That property was actually owned jointly by the city and the county, and the city purchased the county half, and that sale has gone through. And the express purpose was to be able to assemble both that parcel on between 7th and 8th, along with the parcel between 8th and 9th, to make a large enough parcel to effectively build a new parking garage. The city has hired a parking consultant to advise them on actually getting that project constructed. The name of the company is Kimley Horn. They're a national parking and engineering firm. We have agreed on a two-step process to do this. For the first time, the city of Charlottesville is going to do this as a design build project. The city has never done that before. In a design build contract, we're going to put out an RFQ, a request for qualifications, and we're hope to get a number of firms that are interested in constructing this project. The evaluation team of the city will evaluate those firms and decide on 3 to 5 of the firms who they believe are qualified to actually perform the construction, the design build. Those 3 to 5 companies will then receive an RFP, a request for proposals. And we'll then get proposals back from each of those 3 to 5 teams on what kind of building they'd build to meet the city's requirements. those basic requirements will be in the RFP, but off the top of my head are something on the order of more than 250 parking spaces. 10,000 feet of street front retail facing Market Street. So when this building gets built, it doesn't end up with a dead street. Instead, this Market Street is activated between 7th and 9th. And other than that, it's pretty much up to the creativity of these design teams on what they can build there. Oh, the other important factor is that this be a by right project. We have a timetable when these spaces have to be delivered to the county. And there is a concern that if this is not a by right project and instead requires the council and the planning commission to give some variance to the construction code, then that's going to slow the process down and thus make us miss the deadlines to deliver this product. So it's build something by right, build at least 250 parking spaces, make sure we've got some commercial space facing Market Street, and then let your creativity go to town. So the objective will be that we'll select one team to be the design build team based on providing the best project for us. And then we'll sign a construction contract with that team, and they will actually design the garage and they will build the garage. And they'll deliver it by the deadline.
So I'm sorry, what's that? Sorry.
We're in the process of working with the consultant to have them guide us in this project of drafting the RFQ and the RFP, and they'll also help us in the evaluation. Now, please go ahead, Jake.
Yeah, sorry about that. Could you tell me what the timeline is for the RFQ and the RFP? Like when those need to be hit in order to meet the ultimate deadline?
We are having a kickoff meeting with Kimley Horn tomorrow to work on finalizing a timeline that will lay those out. But we're looking at something this spring in terms of getting the RFQ on the street and getting the RFP on the street. And we have to deliver the garage in fall of 2023. So we don't have a lot of time. We're looking at a construction period for the design build of about a year and a half. And then about 6 months to be able to go from today to actually get somebody under contract. So that's the general timelines. Hopefully we'll have an agreed upon timeline after tomorrow's kickoff meeting.
That sounds ambitious, but good luck.
Well, it's not ambitious. We have absolutely got to do it.
Yep.
Part of this MOA with the county was real poison pills for the city if they failed to live up to their half of the bargain. So failure is not an option. We need to get this moving.
What were those poison pills?
Well, there's some requirements that if we don't deliver, then we have to give them back their parking lot. And that's the one that we bought half of it from them. There's things like if we don't deliver their 90 spaces, then they get to be on the ground floor of the Market Street garage. If you can imagine, that would be quite a nightmare to try to get other people to drive through these county exclusively owned spaces to use the remaining spaces in the garage. Just operationally, that would be very difficult. So certainly following through with the intent of the agreement, I think would be better for the city and the county. The MO, I'll be happy to send a copy of that MOA to everyone if they'd like.
That'd be great.
Rick, is anybody looking at what the needs are for that 10,000 square feet of retail? And I'm thinking in terms of, as we're about to hit a retail, or as we're starting to have a retail apocalypse on the mall, whether there are, when they get to that design phase, whether the city has identified any needs. And I'm thinking in terms of, does the city need more office space? Is there a need for a quality childcare center downtown? Is there a need for, something else, and trying to at least suggest that to the people that are designing that? Or are we just looking that they're going to do a shell that can be turned into anything?
We have not written the RFP. I am only one member of the committee, but I believe we're looking at simply providing a heated and cooled shell, and that this would be commercial space. Sometimes it's referred to as retail. It is commercial space. They could be office space, they could be restaurants, they could be childcare, they could be anything. But one of the things I think everyone has agreed upon is we don't want a dead wall down 2 blocks across from the mall. We want to activate the street. We want to make this pedestrian friendly, and we want to make it a place where people want to come. And we don't want to lose this opportunity. Come on, Joan, smile.
Could I ask one other question about if you could maybe unpack the implications of it having to be by right, like sort of what the current zoning allows there? I was wondering, what I'm actually wondering is if residential is allowed there.
There is a 60-foot height restriction by right. There's also setbacks that are required. We did look in terms of feasibility studies at the idea of building a building that had, for instance, residential above it and parking on the lower floors. And because of the setback requirements, if you go higher than the 60 feet, it becomes very unproductive space. There is a memo that's been drafted on just that topic to the city manager. I think I can share that with you. I think it's been finalized now, but it lays out kind of what you would end up with is 10 units that are the most expensive units the world has ever seen because of what the costs would be to build them on top of the garage. To begin with, it's not a very good footprint for even building the garage. To build a really efficient garage, you need at least 60 feet in width, and that gives you enough space to put rows of parking with some circulation around them, and we don't have that. So it's not a very efficient design, no matter how creative you get, and trying to put office or residential above it just makes it worse. It gets more difficult. Plus, you start creating more parking demand, which then starts meaning that however many spaces you build, are you really adding any parking supply? Or are they just being eaten up by both the county requirement and the demand that you've created in the new building? And so you haven't really solved any demand issues.
Which is still
things we're kind of looking at is the idea of trying to move all city parkers, city employee parkers out of Market Street and get city fleet vehicles off the streets. You'll notice there are a bunch of them parked on 8th Street right now, and get them into this new garage so that we can make the street spaces and Market Street available to the public instead of being eaten up by city employees. And this, we're looking at this garage as a possibility, as a way to do that.
Rick, I'm going to add a comment. The Market Street and Water Street designed for retail are some of the worst designs I've seen anywhere in terms of the signage, the overhangs, the way those spaces were designed. And I'm wondering if whoever is on this committee with this design, if you couldn't have one or two people that are familiar with retail just be part of the committee that's overseeing this or involved with the process or something. But the two designs for those two spaces that the city has done so far for retail are really awful.
Well, I'll share with you that the design of the garage is pretty awful.
Oh, yes.
Water Street, for instance, I mean, this is a really minor point, but it has no hose bibs except on the roof at the center of the garage. So if you want to wash the stair towers down, you have to run hoses from those hose bibs all over the garage to get to be able to scrub the floors of the stair towers. I mean, that's just a simple thing that if there had been an architect more familiar with parking garages, they would have seen was necessary. In the same way, we need to get an architect that's not just familiar with building parking garages, but is familiar with building commercial space to be able to make that commercial space effective, which was the objective in making the street activated. Poor commercial space isn't going to help that. So the city's evaluation team is well aware of these issues. The other thing is it gives us just the opportunity to do a lot of things that weren't available when the Water Street garage was built. I mean, for instance, planning right now to do solar arrays on the roof of the garage to cut down on its energy needs and actually provide shade and cover for the cars underneath them. Stormwater management, putting in the kind of water filters that would allow you to use hoses down the stairwells and across the floors to wash those petrochemicals off the concrete to make the concrete last longer, but at the same time clean that water before it goes out to the sanitary sewer system. These are just things that you build in garages now that were never imagined when they built the Water Street garage.
Well, let's hope that whoever gets that contract is schooled in all of these fields, but I don't think we're going to solve it today. So what else have we got on the agenda for now?
That's the three items I thought that probably would be most important to you. If the panel has some other things that they'd like to plan for either this meeting or future meetings.
And
Anyone
Brian,
got open issues that we've had discussions about before?
Brian's suggesting you take the public comments now.
All right. If we don't have any old business, then we will open up for comments then. Brian, can you handle that?
Be glad to help you with that. I think it was
Excellent.
Mr. Ness who made the recommendation. Give credit where credit's due. Mr. Chairman, how many minutes would you like to give each speaker?
3 minutes to start. Does that seem reasonable?
Okay, if you'd like to speak to the Planning Advisory Panel, click the raise hand icon in the Zoom.
Parking
webinar.
advisory. We're not planning.
Excuse me, Parking Advisory Panel. And I saw some hands up, but they went down. Now they're back up. Rory Stolzenberg, you're on with the Parking Advisory Panel.
Thanks, Brian, and good afternoon, Parking Advisory Panel. Well, one quick thing about the garage, but I'll say before my main point. But I'd encourage you staff to think about the potential of seeking a rezoning to downtown extended now, which will allow a by right use without some of those issues with massing and setbacks that you were speaking about. And it sounds like from the timeline of this, could potentially even be fully complete by the time the RFP is awarded and they're planning to construct the project. But what I really wanted to talk about is parklets for outdoor dining. So you guys may have seen the council action last night about mall patio rental spaces. There was also a clause in there that they will now, or they'll allow restaurants to rent out an on-street parking space for 50% the, I guess, normal price. And I'd urge the panel to encourage staff and council and the city in general to encourage the program or a program of restaurants using on-street parking spaces for outdoor dining to encourage patrons to still dine there, but safely outside. Many restaurants don't have a parking lot to put that in and aren't on the mall. And that is one place to create an outdoor dining facility. Some of the least forward-thinking cities in the country are providing free on-street parking spaces for outdoor dining. That could be a really cool program for the city to do, and I think it is right in your wheelhouse as a panel. So thank you and have a great day.
All right, thank you. And do we have anybody else in queue, Brian?
We do not.
All right, shall we close public comment?
Can I just let Mike and I add that we have both been advocating with the city to allow that additional cafe space in parking spots and to do everything they can to help businesses to find additional locations where they can have outdoor cafe space. And I know we've talked with Jason and he's been trying to help us with that as well.
Jason, have we seen demand from any of the restaurants for utilizing spaces that way?
We have had several inquiries and worked with zoning and traffic on them. The Virginian on the corner has kind of an ideal location for they've used it several weekends to expand their cafe space, with it being surrounded by bollards on both sides and cafe spaces. It's been protected from traffic. There's been several restaurants that have looked downtown for spaces. The challenge for one of those especially has been the topography on the side streets with it's just the slant.
Yep.
And the challenge and the I guess hesitation with those restaurants has been the cost to level the space, to provide needed traffic barriers, and then furnish and be able to serve those spaces. So we've certainly talked to quite a few, I shouldn't say quite a few, we've certainly talked to a few restaurants that have been interested in. I would say that, there is a difference between a parklet, which is kind of a public seating area, and a private cafe spaces, which was everyone who's contacted our office has been interested in a private cafe space.
I guess my question, so would it be would there be like an annual lease, sort of like the cafe spaces are now, that would give them exclusive use of that parking, or is it something that would be more,
we haven't, I guess, gotten that far. I mean, the city currently has like the valet ordinance on the books, which I think it could kind of replicate that. Just so everybody's aware, it's $20 a day per parking space to rent. So now it's $10 for a valet. It's $500 a year that gives you access to those spaces. So I think there are things that we could look at that are already on the books that makes it a lot easier to replicate and have. It's just finding those restaurants that are wanting to do that. I think there's just a lot of hesitation towards spending that kind of money on the what if, and if people are going to come. Obviously, I don't own the restaurant, and I know people on this call are, so I would defer to them.
Okay. I'm not sure that there's anything for us to take action on that, other than I think that, the city's moving in the right direction to open that door. If there's a lot of demand, it may be something that we need to chime in on, since it would affect overall inventory available in the commercial areas.
And Jason, I do communicate a lot with other restaurants. Should I reach out and say anyone who seriously wants to look in this should bombard Jason Ness, or what can we do to let people know that the city kind of needs a clearer picture of who's interested and what it would look like in order to move forward on something?
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to bombard me, but I'm happy to talk with them. I think just understanding what their long-term, is it a long-term issue? Because if it's a long-term issue, then you're looking at doing the procedures of a public notice to change a parking space, or if it's a temporary thing during this declaration of emergency. But yeah, please send them my way. I'm happy to talk with them, and both the zoning and traffic staff have been incredibly responsive to trying to figure this out as well.
Any other new issues to bring up?
Mr. Hutto, I know you closed public comment. I just want to let you know, Mr. Stolzenberg did raise his hand again, in case you want to entertain.
I think we have time, so yeah, I'm fine with.
He has a minute left on his previous clock.
Uh-oh.
So we will bring him back.
Hey, thanks for that. Sorry, I should have written these comments down. But quickly, I just wanted to say I do have two specific recommendations. And the first is to just cut the cost entirely. The opportunity of these costs in parking spaces is going to be, I mean, we're currently providing them to motorists for free. It's going to be much less than the value provided, even, to the city, and meals taxes, which we've seen are down in the budget picture is dire. The payback is going to definitely be significant. And then B is to guarantee them, I think, at least through next summer, because as you said, restaurant owners or any small business owner is going to be reluctant to take that big investment, take that risk, knowing that they have to pay daily rent on it. So it's kind of no surprise that only one restaurant is doing it, and only with 2 tables and only on the weekends, because there needs to be certainty there to create a real semi-permanent installation that we've seen in Culpeper and Stanton even, but also up in New York City and many other cities where it's thoroughly protected from traffic and, really feels like a, put together space and not some tables sitting in the street. So that's all I got. Thanks, guys.
All right. Jason, I guess if you can just keep us posted as these requests come in that would have a long-term impact. I think, short-term during the emergency period, I'm fine with the city making whatever accommodations are needed. Anyone else have a strong opinion there?
I think it should be temporary, and then if it's going to be long-term, have a reconsideration of that, because we've talked about changes to parking on streets should be something that is looked at comprehensively and not piecemeal. But during the pandemic and for a certain period of time, I think it's great to do it.
Yeah, I agree. I think anything permanent, we've got to look at the broad picture.
But it does feel like, to the extent that the city can be nimble in responding to the pandemic, and sort of like seize opportunities while we can, that would be great.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and Jason, I know there's been talk about possible help from the city with facilitating tents on existing cafes for restaurants, on West Main, for example, or in other locations that don't have those cafes. This could be, something that would be an equivalent, essentially, provide them with more viable outdoor dining options than they already have.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's never been the intent in our understanding that if somebody wanted to put up a 6-month cafe space on a street, that we charge them $20 a day or even $10 a day. But yeah, I think we're looking at all different options on how to support the restaurants.
Any other new business, folks?
Move to adjourn?
I'm sorry, quick one. I thought maybe we were going to talk, I might have seen an outmoded agenda, but the status of this panel with regard to who we are giving advice to and whether they want that advice in light of the council's recent change there. Can anyone help clarify that?
I'll take a stab at it. I mean, I think the reason that I devote my time to it is because whether they want it or not, council needs advice from those of us who have intimate interest wrapped around parking. And, I felt that in prior years, there wasn't sufficient enough attention. And that's why when this panel was created, I put my hand up right away to be here. So I think that as long as we are recognized by council, then we should vet the issues that we feel are important, and when necessary, float our opinions to council without them having to reach out to us. That's personal opinion. Joan, I know you've kind of.
Yeah, I feel I've been chair of DBAC since it started, which is before 2000. Over the years, there are incidents that we react to instead of being part of the discussion. So every time something happens, it's like it's too late to even make a change. So it's whether the city sold the lot where McGuire Woods is because Huja decided it was okay to sell it to them for $50,000, which was probably one of the most desirable properties in town. There's continuous issues that happen. And we feel that what we've been asking for is to be involved in the process to get as much information as we can prior to decisions being made, which is still part of the discussion, because since we've been having this committee, we found out that some of the bike group, there was an instance where there was a change to bike routes and street crossings, which was going to lose how many parking spots? Like
14.
14.
Yeah.
And after we complained, we actually had a net gain where they were able to do the project and figure out how to reconfigure what they were doing, add parking without any detriment to the project. But had we not gotten involved, we would have just lost 14 parking spots. So we feel that it's really important to be involved with this and to have the city hear our voice. Rick is our person that then conveys that message. He's always going to have their ear, and this is a way for us to funnel different opinions to the city. And our livelihoods depend on people being able to come downtown and shop and dine, feel they can do it safely, feel that they have that access, and do it in a way that makes sense.
And there isn't a direct mechanism. I mean, these meetings help inform, Jason comes, Chris Engel is usually here, Rick is here. One of the things that has come up is that when it was Kirby, I think, who spotted that story about the bike path, there's not a mechanism by which, everything has to be run past us. It's just more of us keeping our eye on the issue and creating that feedback. We'd love to have our input requested, but that generally doesn't happen other than by the formation and the actual existence of the panel. But so there isn't, it's not a perfect entity in that sense, but it at least gives us an opportunity to sort of think things through out loud. Everybody keeping their eyes on, well, I noticed this about this, we made changes to signage just because of observations that we had made about how people saw a sign, assumed, for a temporary construction, assumed it meant that there was no parking when it was actually announcing that next week there was no parking, and so they kept driving thinking that spot wasn't available, and then these spots that were available weren't being used. Little things like that if we're all tuned into them, reading articles, experiencing, life on the city streets here, that we are then able to provide feedback, occasionally write a letter as necessary, but also just through having Jason and Chris and Rick here.
Rick, would you like me to share council's discussion about the transition?
Yeah, why don't you do that, Brian?
Yeah, just briefly, council had a work session October 6th, and they, as part of their work, wanted to review the 60 plus boards and commissions that they appoint people to, and that many of them serve on. There are, 30, 35 boards that we staff, and that includes the parking advisory panel. They selected 4 of the boards to make them staff advisory bodies, including this one. And what that means is council would no longer be involved in appointing people to this panel. That would be done through the city manager's office, obviously based on, feedback from Mr. Siebert and Mr. Engel about the recommendations. So the change would be that it's no longer a public body. However, John Blair, the acting city manager, has requested that as we move forward with these staff advisory bodies, that we continue to handle them as if they were a public body with respect to advertising the meetings, taking minutes, and making sure that it's available to the public to participate. So they wanted to review all their boards and commissions and try to take back some of the ones that they were involved with. That said, because we're in the pandemic state of emergency, and when it comes to virtual meetings, the communications department has been heavily involved in facilitating meetings of boards and commissions to ensure we get a recording, it's properly advertised, et cetera. And one change after this takes effect officially, which we expect to happen in November. So in November, council will have an ordinance amendment in front of them. It'll mention the parking advisory panel, and it'll mention that it's becoming a staff advisory body. So there will be a new set of operational guidelines that's developed with your input, and that will help guide how people get onto it and how you structure your meetings. Joan Fenton is aware of the Unity Days Action Committee and its operating guidelines, and that's another good example of a staff advisory body that reports up to the city manager as opposed to directly to council. So I think among the things you mentioned as work activities for this panel, I think the city manager's office hopes those things will continue. That when you see a concern, you're reporting it quickly to staff so that we can act on those recommendations quickly. So communications will drop out of your future meetings once you're officially a staff advisory panel. Today you're not. Today you're still a public body. November, you become a staff advisory panel. Communications will drop out of your meetings, and then Jason Ness or Rick Siebert, one of them will probably help facilitate the Zoom portion of this as a virtual meeting. Once we get through the pandemic, then you're just meeting in City Hall as a staff advisory body, but again, open to the public, and you can decide, what sort of format you will take a public comment on. But our commitment is to keep these meetings open, recorded, minutes available, and advertised in all the usual places. I hope that answers your question.
It does, and we'll miss you.
Yeah, Jake, I think another point that was sort of touched on but not explicitly stated is a lot of this has kind of been informally without a need to go to council, but just something comes up that we think is going to affect parking. We sort of distribute that information to the rest of the panel, and then individually, myself or Joan or whoever has gone to the meeting about that project and said, hey guys, we're a little concerned about the impact on parking. And, at least that voice is getting into the conversation. So it hasn't always been a formal structure, but I think that we have been impactful because of the fact that we're having these meetings, we're making sure people are aware, and we're able to, to sort of form an opinion, and when necessary, raise our hand and inject ourselves in the conversation. So, I feel like we've done some good. I'd like to think we're going to get more things completed over the future years.
Price of parking is eternal vigilance.
Absolutely. Any other new business, questions, concerns before we adjourn? Mike, you want to make a motion?
I move to adjourn.
Do we have a second? All in favor? All right. Thank you, everyone, and welcome to all the new members. We'll see you next month.
Kirby, you're gonna run it next month too?
We'll see. We'll see. We're going to have elections at some point.
Nice meeting you all.
All right.
That is, by the way, our longest meeting ever.
Yep.
Um,
Late for work.
Not my fault.